3 months after the incident at Kepler 442b, Lee Min-ho stood in the same office on Luna Station, where he had first received the invitation to the peace conference. But everything had changed. The holographic display above his desk now showed not reports of battles but economic rebuilding statistics from across the galaxy. The war between the Coalition and the Vorthak Empire had ended not with surrender or victory, but with a joint investigation into the Nexus Consortium's operations. Park Ji-won entered the office, carrying a tablet filled with the latest intelligence reports. She looked more relaxed than she had in years, though she still maintained her careful attention to detail. The final Nexus cell was shut down on Rigel 7 yesterday, she reported. That makes it a clean sweep across all known consortium territories. Any resistance? None. Once the financial evidence became public, most Nexus operatives either surrendered voluntarily or were turned in by their own communities. Apparently, people don't like finding out they've been funding a war profiteering conspiracy. Lee Min-ho nodded. The galaxy-wide broadcast that Dr. Lim Doha had coordinated during the crisis had done more than just expose the Nexus Consortium. It had shown millions of citizens across hundreds of worlds exactly how they had been manipulated and robbed for 3 years. The public reaction had been swift and decisive. Nexus assets had been frozen, their operatives arrested, and their network dismantled within weeks. But more importantly, the revelation had forced a complete reassessment of how galactic conflicts were understood and resolved. "How are the new peace talks going?" Lee Min-ho asked. "Better than anyone expected. The Coalition and Vorthak representatives are actually working together now. Apparently, discovering that you've both been manipulated by the same enemy creates a strong bond." Kim Hyun-woo knocked on the office door and entered, looking excited. He was carrying several documents and could barely contain his enthusiasm. "Sir, I have the final report on the post-Nexus negotiations," he said, setting the papers on Lee Min-ho's desk. "You're not going to believe how much has changed." Lee Min-ho picked up the first document. It was a formal treaty between the Coalition and the Vorthak Empire, but it looked nothing like traditional military agreements. "Economic cooperation zones," he read. "Joint infrastructure projects, cultural exchange programs. The Vorthak are helping rebuild Coalition worlds that were damaged in the fighting," Kim Hyun-woo explained. "And the Coalition is sharing agricultural technology with Vorthak colonies that were struggling with food shortages. Food shortages that the Nexus artificially created to encourage Vorthak expansion," Park Ji-won added. "It turns out most of their territorial demands were driven by resource problems that could have been solved through trade." Lee Min-ho continued reading. The treaty addressed not just the end of hostilities, but the underlying economic and social issues that had made the war possible in the first place. It was exactly the type of comprehensive peace agreement that Professor Choi Yoon-ji had advocated for during the original negotiations. "And this is working?" he asked. "Better than working. It's created a template that other species are starting to use for their own conflicts," Kim Hyun-woo said. "They're calling it the Earth method of conflict resolution." The Earth method. Lee Min-ho had heard the term being used more and more frequently in diplomatic circles. It referred to the approach that the human delegation had used, focusing on underlying causes rather than surface symptoms, using interdisciplinary teams instead of pure military leadership, and treating conflicts as problems to be solved rather than battles to be won. "Speaking of which," Park Ji-won said, "Dr. Song Min-jae wanted to speak with you. She's in conference room 3. Lee Min-ho made his way through Luna Station's corridors, noting how much busier the place had become. Where, once Earth's diplomatic facilities had been quiet backwaters, they were now bustling with activity. Representatives from dozens of species came to Luna Station to study human conflict resolution methods. He found Song Min-jae in conference room 3, reviewing materials with a mixed group of human and alien staff members. She looked up as he entered and smiled. "Lee Min-ho, perfect timing. We were just discussing the proposal for the new Interspecies Conflict Resolution Institute. The one you want to establish here on Luna Station?" "The one the Galactic Coalition wants us to establish," she corrected. They're offering to fund the entire project, including facilities for 500 staff members and students from across the galaxy. Lee Min-ho sat down at the conference table. Around him were humans and aliens working together on documents, just as they had during the crisis at Kepler 442b. But now it was normal, not an emergency response. What would this institute actually do? He asked. Professor Choi Yoonji looked up from the economic projections she was reviewing. She had been commuting between Earth and Luna Station for months, helping to design the new approach to galactic diplomacy. Training, primarily, she said. Most species have excellent military academies, but no one has schools that teach people how to prevent wars from starting in the first place. We'd also conduct research, Dr. Kang Soo-hyun added. She was participating in the meeting via hologram from her office on Earth, where she was writing a comprehensive study of interspecies psychology. Every species thinks differently, has different values, different ways of solving problems. If we can understand these differences better, we can prevent conflicts before they become wars. Yoon Jae-hwan was reviewing news reports from across the galaxy. The demand is definitely there. I'm seeing requests for conflict resolution assistance from 37 different systems just this week. What kind of conflicts? Lee Min-ho asked. Trade, disputes, territorial disagreements, resource allocation problems. The same types of issues that used to escalate into shooting wars. But now they're being referred for mediation instead. Oh-yerim joined the conversation via another holographic connection. She had been traveling across the galaxy, helping to establish security protocols for diplomatic missions. The galaxy is safer now than it's been in decades, she reported, not because there are more weapons or stronger militaries, but because there are better ways to resolve disputes before they become dangerous. Song Min-jae stood up and walked to the room's large window. Outside, Earth was visible as a blue marble against the black of space. You know, when we first accepted the invitation to those peace talks, I thought we were taking a huge risk. We were taking a huge risk, Lee Min-ho pointed out. True, but we were also doing what humans do best. We were adapting to a situation that no one had faced before, finding new solutions to old problems. She turned back to the group. Every species in the galaxy had military leaders and diplomats, but only humans had experience being the small, weak species that survived by being smarter rather than stronger. Dr. Lim Do-ha's voice came over the communication system from her office in the economic analysis section. That's why the Earth method works. It's based on the idea that lasting solutions come from understanding problems completely, not from overpowering opposition. Lee Min-ho looked around the room at the humans and aliens working together. 6 months ago, this scene would have been impossible. Earth was too isolated, too unimportant to be involved in galactic affairs. Now Earth was becoming the center of a new approach to galactic civilization. There's something else, Song Min-jae said. General Thaxon sent a personal message yesterday. The Vorthak general who called us weak? The same one. He wanted to thank us for showing his people that there were alternatives to constant warfare. Apparently, Vorthak society is undergoing major changes as they adapt to peacetime. She activated a holographic display showing a message written in Vorthak script with a translation below it. Honored humans, the message read, the Vorthak Empire has learned that true strength comes not from defeating enemies, but from understanding them. We request that you teach us this human way of making peace. They want to send students here? Lee Min-ho asked. Hundreds of them, and they're not the only ones. The coalition wants to send their diplomatic corps for retraining. Dozens of smaller species want to learn conflict prevention techniques. Even the neutral systems are interested in mediation methods. Park Ji-won had been listening to the conversation from her seat at the table. It's ironic, isn't it? For centuries, humans were ignored because we were too weak to matter in galactic politics. Now we're becoming central to galactic politics precisely because we learned how to succeed without being strong. Kim Hyun-woo looked up from the documents he was reviewing. I've been analyzing the changes in galactic conflict patterns since the Nexus exposure. Armed conflicts are down 70%. Trade disputes resolved through mediation are up 400%. Economic cooperation agreements have doubled. And the best part, Professor Choi Yoonji added, is that it's self-reinforcing. The more species learn to resolve conflicts peacefully, the more examples other species have to follow. Lee Minho stood up and joined Song Minjae at the window. So this is why Earth never sends soldiers to peace talks. Exactly. Soldiers are trained to end conflicts through victory. But victory over an enemy doesn't solve the problems that caused the conflict in the first place. It just postpones them until the next war. Whereas civilians are trained to solve. Dr. Song Minjae stood in the station's central command center, watching the tactical display as Nexus boarding ships closed in on their position. Around her, delegates from dozens of species worked together in ways that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. But now, as the moment of truth approached, it was time to reveal the full extent of Earth's planning. All stations, this is Song Minjae, she announced over the communication system. Before we begin our defense, there's something you all need to know about Earth's delegation. The comm channel fell silent as hundreds of aliens throughout the station listened. We didn't come here just to negotiate peace. We came here to end the war by eliminating its true cause. And that cause was never the conflict between the Coalition and the Vorthak Empire. In the fabrication areas, Shin Taiwan continued assembling defensive systems while listening to Song Minjae's announcement. But his movements had changed. They were more precise now, more efficient. His expertise went far beyond simple logistics. Shin Taiwan isn't just an engineer, Song Minjae continued. He's a former military engineer who specialized in unconventional warfare. Every system we've built in the past hour was designed not just to defend this station, but to trap the Nexus forces and gather intelligence on their operations. General Thaxon's voice crackled over the comm. You deceived us about your identities? We told you we were civilians, Song Minjae replied. That was true, but we didn't tell you what kind of civilians. Professor Choi Yoonji spoke up from her position in the Economic Analysis Center. My research on post-war reconstruction wasn't academic. It was intelligence gathering. We've been tracking Nexus financial operations for 2 years, waiting for an opportunity to expose them. And I'm not just a journalist, Yoon Jae-won added from his position monitoring communications. I'm an investigative specialist who spent 5 years uncovering corruption networks. Every question I've asked in the past 2 days was designed to confirm what we already suspected about Nexus manipulation. Oh Yareem's voice joined the conversation from the security center. The dead assassin in the ventilation system? I killed him. I'm not just a security consultant, I'm a former special operations officer who specializes in protecting high-value targets in hostile environments. The comm channel erupted with voices as delegates throughout the station reacted to these revelations. AdmiralZethros's voice cut through the noise. So Earth did send military personnel to the peace talks. No, Song Minjae said firmly. We sent civilians who happen to have military backgrounds. There's a difference. What difference? General, Thaxon demanded. Dr. Kang Soo-hyun answered from her position in the Psychological Analysis Center. Soldiers are trained to fight enemies. Civilians are trained to solve problems. We've been solving the problem of this war since before we arrived at this station. The Nexus Consortium expected to face diplomats and military officers, Song Minjae explained. They prepared for traditional negotiation tactics and conventional military responses. They didn't prepare for a coordinated intelligence operation designed to expose their entire network. On the tactical display, the first Nexus boarding ship was approaching the station's docking bay. But instead of the desperate defense, the Nexus forces expected they found something very different. Shin Tae-won had converted the docking bay into a sophisticated trap. As the boarding ship locked onto the docking clamps, hidden sensors began recording everything. Ship specifications, crew communications, weapon signatures, even the chemical composition of their life support systems. Nexus Boarding Team Alpha, you are cleared for entry, Oh Yareem said over the docking bay communication system, disguising her voice to sound like a standard station AI. The Nexus soldiers who emerged from their ship found themselves in what appeared to be a normal docking bay with normal lighting and normal atmospheric conditions. They had no idea that every step they took, every word they spoke, and every piece of equipment they carried was being analyzed and recorded. Teams 2 through 6 proceed to designated areas. Their leader commanded. Remember, we need evidence that all delegates were eliminated, but we also need to make it look like an accident. In the command center, Han Jisoo smiled grimly as she heard this transmission. Did everyone hear that? They're not just here to kill us, they're here to cover up their own involvement in the war. The Nexus teams spread throughout the station, following routes that had been carefully prepared for them. Each path led them past hidden sensors and recording devices. Each room they entered had been equipped with systems designed to gather intelligence about their operations, their equipment, and their methods. But the real trap was still to come. Dr. Lim Do-ha had spent hours working with economists from across the galaxy to prepare a comprehensive analysis of Nexus financial operations. Now, as the Nexus forces moved through the station, she was broadcasting this analysis to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Citizens of the galaxy, her voice carried across hundreds of star systems, what you are about to see is evidence of the greatest financial conspiracy in galactic history. The broadcast included detailed financial records, shipping manifests, communication intercepts, and testimony from delegates representing 47 different species. It showed how the Nexus Consortium had manipulated both sides of the war, profiting from weapons sales, reconstruction contracts, and resource speculation. The Nexus Consortium has stolen trillions of credits from your governments, Dr. Lim Do-ha continued. They have prolonged a war that could have ended 2 years ago, and now they are attempting to murder the delegates who came here to make peace. In the docking bay, the Nexus team leader received an urgent communication from his ship. Sir, we're detecting massive data transmissions from the station. Someone is broadcasting across the entire galaxy. Jam the transmissions. We're trying, sir, but the signal is being routed through the station's emergency broadcast system. It's designed to be impossible to jam. Yareem had anticipated this response. The emergency broadcast system was indeed designed to be jam-proof, but she had also prepared backup transmission routes through the station's maintenance networks, life support systems, and even the gravity generators. Sir, they're not just broadcasting from one location, another Nexus soldier reported. The entire station has been turned into a transmission array. Meanwhile, Nexus teams throughout the station were discovering that their mission was becoming more difficult by the minute. Doors that should have been unlocked were sealed. Life support systems were fluctuating in ways that made their equipment malfunction. And everywhere they went, they felt like they were being watched. This isn't right, one team leader reported. The delegates should be panicking and easy to locate. Instead, it's like they've disappeared. They hadn't disappeared. They were hiding in prepared positions throughout the station, safe from the Nexus forces but still able to coordinate their activities. Goneon had set up a mobile medical station in the main conference hall, treating anyone who had been injured during the initial attack. But her real job was coordinating the psychological warfare campaign. Attention, Nexus forces. Her voice echoed through the station's speaker systems. Your financial records are now being broadcast to your homeworlds. Your families and neighbors are learning what you've been doing for the past 3 years. Dr. Kang Soo-hyun had prepared psychological profiles of typical Nexus operatives based on intercepted communications and behavioral analysis. Most of you joined the consortium because you needed money, she added, but you were told you were providing security services, not prolonging a war that killed billions of innocent people. The consortium lied to you, Professor Choi Yoonji's voice joined in. Your commanders have been getting rich while you risked your lives. The evidence is now public across the galaxy. The psychological pressure was working. Nexus communications were becoming increasingly chaotic as soldiers questioned their orders and commanders struggled to maintain control. Abort the mission, one team leader shouted. This was supposed to be a simple cleanup operation, not a galactic exposure. But it was too late to abort. The station's systems had been designed to prevent easy escape once the Nexus forces were committed to their attack. Docking clamps had been modified to hold their ships in place. Navigation systems were being jammed, and their own weapons were being turned against them through clever manipulation of the station's magnetic fields. Shin Tae-won had spent years studying unconventional warfare, and he had prepared for exactly this type of situation. The beautiful thing about fighting criminals, he explained to the mixed team of aliens helping him coordinate the defense, is that they're not prepared to sacrifice themselves for a cause. When the job becomes too dangerous or unprofitable, they look for ways to escape. And we're making sure they can't escape until we've gathered all the evidence we need, Yerim added. The final phase of the plan was about to begin. Song Minjae made one last announcement to the Nexus forces. Attention Nexus Consortium operatives. You came here to eliminate evidence of your crimes. Instead, you've provided us with even more evidence. Your ships, your equipment, your communications, and your methods are now being studied by intelligence agencies across the galaxy. But we're prepared to offer you a choice. Han Jisoo had been Earth's delegation coordinator for less than 2 years, but she had never faced a situation like this. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows in the corridors as she moved through the station, checking on the other human delegates and trying to understand what was happening. The approaching fleet had identified themselves 20 minutes ago. They called themselves the Nexus Consortium, and their message had been simple. All delegates had 1 hour to evacuate the station before it would be destroyed. Most of the alien delegations were panicking. Some were demanding immediate evacuation. Others were trying to contact their home governments for instructions. The military delegates were frustrated because their escort ships had already been destroyed by the Nexus fleet. But the human delegation was doing something different. Status report, Han Jisoo said as she entered the temporary command center they had set up in Song Minjae's quarters. The station's main computers are still functioning, Shin Tae-won reported. He was officially listed as a logistics expert, but his background included engineering systems under extreme conditions. The Nexus disabled the weapons and shields, but they left the life support and basic systems running. Why would they do that? Song Minjae asked. Maybe they want to keep us alive long enough to send a message to the galaxy, Yerim suggested. Nothing says we're serious like destroying a peace conference. Go Neon looked up from her tablet. She was the delegation's medical officer, but she had been analyzing the station's internal sensors. I've been monitoring the other delegates. Several species are showing signs of extreme stress. If we don't do something soon, some of them might collapse from fear alone. Han Jisoo processed this information quickly. Throughout her career, she had specialized in coordinating complex projects under pressure. This was certainly the most extreme situation she had faced, but the principles were the same. We need to take control of the situation, she decided. Take control? Song Minjae raised an eyebrow. We're 12 humans on a station with thousands of aliens, facing a hostile fleet that outguns everyone combined. Exactly. Which means we're the only ones thinking clearly right now. Han Jisoo moved to the center of the room. Everyone listen. The military delegates are trained to fight enemies they can see and understand. But this Nexus Consortium isn't a traditional enemy. They're a business problem. A business problem? Dr. Kang Soo-hyun looked confused. Think about it. They've been making money from this war for 3 years. The peace talks threaten their profits, so they're here to eliminate the threat and send a message to anyone else who might try to make peace. Professor Choi Yoon-ji nodded slowly. It makes sense from an economic perspective. But how does that help us? Because businesses have weaknesses that military forces don't. They care about profit margins, risk management, and public relations. If we can make this operation unprofitable for them, they might reconsider. Shin Tae-won was studying the station's schematics on his tablet. The station has industrial fabrication units in the lower levels. If we can reach them, we might be able to build some kind of defense system. What about the other delegates? Go Nayan asked. We can't just leave them to panic. Han Jisoo made a decision that would change everything. We're going to save them. All of them. How? By doing what humans do best. We're going to improvise. The first step was getting the other delegates organized. Han Jisoo led a team through the station's corridors, moving from delegation to delegation. The scene was chaotic. Some aliens were praying to their gods. Others were sending final messages to their families. A few were arguing about who was to blame for the situation. Song Minjae approached Admiral Zethros, who was standing with a group of coalition officers. They looked lost without their ships and weapons. "Admiral, we need your help," she said calmly. "Help? My fleet is destroyed, my weapons are useless, and we're about to be killed by criminals. What help can I possibly provide? You know your people better than anyone. We need you to keep them calm and organized." Admiral Zethros stared at her. "You're planning something. We're planning to survive, but we need everyone working together." Meanwhile, Yunjae Huan was talking to some of the smaller species delegates. His journalist background had taught him how to get people to talk, even in stressful situations. "Has anyone else noticed strange financial transactions in your territories during the war?" he asked quietly. Several delegates nodded. One of them, a small creature with blue fur, spoke up. "We've been receiving bills for military supplies we never ordered. When we tried to investigate, the companies claimed the orders came from our own government." "Same thing happened to us," said another. "Someone has been forging documents and stealing money across the galaxy." Dr. Kang Soo-hyun was observing General Thaxon and the Vorthak delegates. Even they seemed shaken by the situation, though they were trying to hide it. "Your empire is strong," she said to General Thaxon, "but even strong empires can be manipulated by those who understand their weaknesses." General Thaxon's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone has been playing both sides of this war. They've been making the Coalition and Vorthak Empire dance to their tune for 3 years? Impossible. The Vorthak bow to no one." "Not directly. But what if someone convinced you that the Coalition was weaker than they really were? Or stronger than they really were? What if someone made sure you always had just enough weapons to keep fighting, but never enough to win quickly?" "General," Thaxon was quiet for a long moment. Then he growled, "If what you say is true, then these Nexus criminals have made a grave error. The Vorthak do not forgive those who manipulate us." In the lower levels of the station, Shin Tae-wan was working, with a team of volunteers from various species. The industrial fabrication units were designed to produce replacement parts for the station, but with some creativity, they could produce other things as well. "We can't build weapons powerful enough to fight their ships," he explained to the mixed group of aliens helping him. "But we can build tools that might give us an advantage." "What kind of tools?" asked a coalition engineer. "Communication jammers, sensor disruptors, maybe even some basic defensive systems. The key is to make this station too much trouble to destroy easily." Yurim was studying the station's layout with a team of security personnel from various delegations. "The Nexus fleet is maintaining position outside our weapons range, but they'll have to come closer to board us or to verify that we're really dead after they destroy the station." "Can we use that somehow?" asked a Vorthak security officer. "Maybe. If we can make the station look like it's suffering more damage than it really is, we might be able to fool them into thinking their job is done." Back in the main conference hall, Han Jisoo was addressing the assembled delegates. The hall was packed with aliens of all shapes and sizes, most looking frightened and confused. "I know this situation seems hopeless," she began. "Your military escorts are gone, your weapons are disabled, and you're facing an enemy that seems to have all the advantages." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But this enemy made one critical mistake. They assumed that because you came here as soldiers and diplomats, you could only think like soldiers and diplomats. The murmurs died down as delegates leaned forward to listen. The Nexus Consortium has been treating this galaxy like their personal business for years. They've been manipulating your governments, stealing your resources, and profiting from your suffering. They think they understand you. Han Jisoo paused and looked around the room. But they don't understand humans. And they're about to learn why that's a problem. Song Minjae stepped forward. "We have a plan. It's dangerous, and it requires all of us to work together. But if it succeeds, we won't just save our lives. We'll expose the Nexus Consortium and end their manipulation of galactic politics forever." "What do you need us to do?" Admiral Zethros asked. "We need you to stop thinking like military officers and start thinking like the people you're trying to protect. We need engineers, not just weapons experts. We need economists, not just strategists. We need every skill and every perspective represented in this room." General Thaxon stood up. You want us to abandon our warrior traditions? I want you to remember why you became warriors in the first place, Song Minjae replied. To protect your people. Right now, the best way to protect them is to work together. For a moment, the hall was silent. Then Admiral Zethros stood up. The coalition agrees to follow your plan. General Thaxon glared at him, then slowly nodded. The Vorthak Empire will also cooperate. But if this plan fails, we will die as warriors. If this plan fails, we'll all die, Han Jisoo said. So let's make sure it succeeds. Over the next 30 minutes, the station was transformed. Delegates who had been arguing for 3 years suddenly found themselves working side by side. Coalition and Vorthak engineers collaborated on technical problems. Economists from different species shared data about Nexus financial operations. Cultural experts worked together to coordinate communications between species that had never cooperated before. Go Naeun moved through the station, treating injured aliens and keeping morale up. Her medical training had taught her how to stay calm in emergencies, and her presence seemed to reassure the more frightened delegates. The Nexus fleet is changing position. Oh. Dr. Lim Doha stared at the numbers on her screen and frowned. Something was wrong with the financial data from the war zones, but she couldn't quite figure out what it was yet. The second day of negotiations had begun 3 hours ago, and already, the pattern was becoming clear. The military delegates from both sides sat across from each other, arguing about territory, weapons restrictions, and prisoner exchanges. It was the same type of discussion that had been going on for 3 years, just in a different room. The human delegation sat quietly in their section, taking notes and observing. They had not spoken during the morning session, which seemed to frustrate some of the other delegates. Why aren't the humans participating? She heard Admiral Zethros whisper to one of his aides. Dr. Lim Doha was Earth's senior data analyst. She had spent the morning studying financial records from both Coalition and Vorthak territories, looking for patterns that might explain the war's continuation. What she was finding didn't make sense. Bai Sunho, sitting next to her, was monitoring all the communication channels in the station. He was a communications specialist, and his job was to listen for anything unusual in the diplomatic traffic. The official channels are exactly what you'd expect, he whispered to Lim Doha. Formal statements, position papers, requests for clarification. But there's a lot of encrypted traffic that I can't decode. Encrypted traffic between which delegations? That's the interesting part. It's not between the Coalition and Vorthak delegates, it's between various smaller delegations and someone outside the station. Yareem, sitting on Lim Doha's other side, looked up from her own tablet. She was officially listed as a security consultant, but her background was more complex than that. She had been studying the station's security system since their arrival. I've been analyzing yesterday's incident, she said quietly. The dead Vorthak in the ventilation system. What did you find? Lim Doha asked. The official story doesn't
match the evidence. They said he died from an electrical shock when he touched a power conduit.
But the burn patterns on his body are wrong for that type of injury. Wrong how? They look like weapon burns. Someone killed him and then positioned the body to look like an accident. The 3 humans exchanged glances. If Yareem was right, then someone had murdered a would-be assassin and covered it up. But who? And why? In the main negotiation area, General Thaxon was speaking loudly about Vorthak territorial claims. His voice carried clearly through the hall, and Lim Doha found herself listening despite her focus on the data. The Vorthak Empire requires security zones around our core worlds, he was saying. These zones are non-negotiable. Those security zones include inhabited systems with coalition citizens, replied Admiral Zethros. We cannot abandon our own people. Then relocate them. The strong adapt, the weak perish. It was the same argument they had been having for months, according to the diplomatic records. Neither side was willing to compromise, and both sides kept making demands they knew the other couldn't accept. Lim Doha looked back at her financial data. The war was costing both sides enormous amounts of money and resources. The coalition was spending nearly 40% of their gross domestic product on military expenses. The Vorthak were doing even worse, with military spending approaching 60% of their economy. At this rate, both civilizations would collapse within a few years, regardless of who won the war. So why were they continuing to fight? "I need to check something," she whispered to Bei Sunho. "Can you access shipping records for the neutral systems?" Bei Sunho's fingers moved quickly across his tablet. After a few minutes, he nodded. "I can get some of it. What are you looking for?" "Weapons, sales, medical supplies, raw materials, anything that might be related to the war effort." While Bei Sunho searched, Lim Doha continued analyzing the economic data. The more she studied it, the more confused she became. Both sides were spending massive amounts of money, but not all of it was going to their own military forces. There were payments to dozens of small companies scattered across the galaxy. Shell corporations, middlemen, brokers, and traders. The payment amounts were huge, but the purposes were vague. Strategic materials, logistical support, specialized services. "I found something interesting," Bei Sunho said. "Look at these shipping manifests." Lim Doha looked at his screen. The data showed cargo shipments moving between neutral systems in both Coalition and Vorthak territories. The cargo was listed as industrial equipment, but the quantities and destinations were suspicious. "Those shipping routes go to known weapons manufacturing centers," Oyarim observed, looking over their shoulders. "And look at the timing," Bei Sunho added. "Major shipments arrive just before big battles. It's like someone is supplying both sides." Lim Doha felt a chill run down her spine. Someone is profiting from this war. The morning session ended with no progress, as expected. The delegates broke into smaller groups for informal discussions, and the human delegation gathered in a quiet corner of the hall. Song Minjae listened as Lim Doha explained what they had discovered. Her expression grew more serious with each detail. "You're saying someone is deliberately prolonging this war for profit?" she asked. "That's what the data suggests. Both sides are buying weapons and supplies from the same network of companies, and those companies are charging premium prices because of the war conditions." Professor Choi Yoonji nodded thoughtfully. "It's happened before in human history. During Earth's world wars, some companies sold weapons to both sides. They had an interest in keeping the fighting going as long as possible. But this is on a galactic scale," Yoon Jae-hwan pointed out. "The amount of coordination required would be enormous." Dr. Kang Soo-hyun had been watching the other delegates during the morning session. "I've noticed something about the negotiation patterns. Both sides keep making offers they know will be rejected. It's almost like they're going through the motions rather than seriously trying to reach an agreement. Maybe because they're being influenced by someone who doesn't want an agreement," Song Min-jae said. Yoon Jae-hwan looked around the hall. "If that's true, then some of these delegates might be working for whoever is behind this. Or they might be victims too," Oyarim suggested. "If someone is manipulating the information they receive, they might not realize they're being used." Song Min-jae made a decision. "We need more evidence before we can make any accusations. But we also need to be very careful. If we're right about this conspiracy, then we're probably in danger." The afternoon session began with smaller working groups. The human delegation was assigned to a group focusing on post-war reconstruction, along with delegates from 6 other species. This was more the humans' area of expertise. While the morning had been dominated by military thinking, the afternoon discussions were about economics, social systems, and long-term planning. Professor Ryoi, Choi Yoonji took the lead in these discussions. She began by presenting a historical analysis of post-war reconstruction efforts from across the galaxy. "Successful peace agreements require more than just ending the fighting," she explained to the group. "They require addressing the underlying causes of the conflict." "The underlying cause is Vorthak aggression," said a coalition delegate firmly. "The underlying cause is coalition weakness," countered a Vorthak representative. Professor Choi Yoonji remained calm. "With respect, those are symptoms, not causes. The real question is why this particular conflict started at this particular time." She activated a holographic display showing economic data from both territories. 3 years ago, Both the Coalition and Vorthak Empire were experiencing economic difficulties. Unemployment was rising, trade was declining, and social unrest was increasing. The war provided a convenient distraction from domestic problems. The delegates looked uncomfortable. Professor Choi Yoonji continued. But wars are expensive. Both sides have spent enormous amounts of money and resources, yet the fighting continues despite clear evidence that neither side can achieve total victory. What are you suggesting? Asked the coalition delegate. I'm suggesting that someone benefits from this war continuing. Someone who profits from the conflict itself. The room fell silent. Professor Choi Yoonji shared a meaningful look with Song Minji, who was observing from the back of the room. That's a serious accusation, said a delegate from one of the smaller species. It's not an accusation, Professor Choi Yoonji replied. It's a hypothesis based on economic analysis, but it's a hypothesis we should investigate. After the session ended, several delegates approached the human delegation privately. They were representatives from smaller species who had been caught in the middle of the war. You may be onto something, one of them said quietly. We've noticed irregularities in our own territories. Ships arriving with supplies we didn't order. Bills for services we don't remember requesting. Someone has been very busy during this war, another added. And it's not just the Coalition and Vorthak who are paying the price. That evening, Yoon Jae-won made another discovery. He had been analyzing news reports from across the galaxy, looking for patterns in how the war was being reported. Look at this, he said, gathering the human delegation in Song Minji's quarters. I've been tracking news stories about the war for the past 6 months. There's a pattern. He showed them a timeline of major news events. Every time. Dr. Song Minjae looked out the window of the transport ship as Kepler 442b grew larger ahead of them. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and white clouds that reminded her of Earth. But the massive space station orbiting the planet was unlike anything humans had ever built. The Peace Conference station was enormous, easily 10 times larger than Luna Station. It sparkled with lights from dozens of different architectural styles, each section built to accommodate different alien species. Some areas were tall and thin for species that preferred vertical spaces. Others were wide and low for creatures that moved close to the ground. First time seeing something like this? Asked Professor Choi Yoonji, sitting in the seat next to her. Song Minjae nodded. She was the leader of Earth's delegation, but she had never been to a major galactic event before. None of them had. Earth was too small and unimportant to be invited to such things. It's impressive, she admitted. Behind them, the rest of the human delegation was reviewing their materials one last time. There were only 12 of them, much smaller than the delegations from other species. But Lee Minho had chosen each person carefully. Dr. Kang Soo-hyun was studying psychological profiles of the various alien delegates. She was a xenopsychologist, someone who specialized in understanding how different species thought and behaved. Her work had helped human diplomats avoid cultural misunderstandings in the past. Yoon Jae-won was reading news reports from across the galaxy, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. He had been an investigative journalist before joining the diplomatic service. His job was to find the stories behind the official statements. Professor Choi Yoonji had spent the entire trip analyzing economic data from the war zones. She was looking for financial patterns that might explain why the war continued when both sides were clearly suffering. The other members of the delegation had similar backgrounds. They were economists, historians, cultural specialists, and analysts. Not one of them was a soldier. Docking in 5 minutes, announced the ship's captain. Song Minjae took a deep breath. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but she still felt nervous. Earth's future might depend on how well they handled these negotiations. The docking process was smooth, and soon the human delegation was walking through the station's corridors. The architecture was amazing but also confusing. Different sections had different gravity levels, different atmospheric mixes, and different lighting. It was like walking through several different worlds all connected together. They passed groups of aliens in the corridors. Some were tall and thin with blue skin and 4 arms. Others were short and round with thick fur covering their bodies. A few looked almost human, but with subtle differences like larger eyes or different skin colors. All of them stared at the human delegation as they passed. They seemed surprised to see us, Yoon Jae-won observed quietly. They're probably wondering why we look so ordinary, Song Min-jae replied. The human delegation was escorted to a large reception hall where all the delegates were gathering before the formal sessions began. The room was huge, with a high ceiling that could accommodate even the tallest species. The floor was divided into different zones, each adjusted for the comfort of different types of aliens. Song Min-jae looked around the room and immediately understood why the other delegates seemed surprised by the human group. Every other delegation was led by military officers. She could see the signs: straight postures, formal uniforms, medals and rank insignia. The coalition delegates wore blue uniforms with silver decorations. The Vorthak delegates wore black armor with red symbols. Smaller species had their own military dress, but it all looked similar. These were professional soldiers, people who had spent their careers fighting wars. And then there were the humans, wearing simple civilian clothes and carrying tablets instead of ceremonial weapons. Dr. Song Min-jae? A tall alien with blue skin approached them. His uniform marked him as a high-ranking coalition officer. I am Admiral Zethros of the Centauri Defense Force. I wanted to welcome Earth's delegation personally. Song Min-jae shook his hand, noting that he seemed genuinely pleased to meet her. Thank you, Admiral. We're honored to be here. I must admit we were surprised by your delegation's composition. We expected Earth's military leaders. Earth takes a different approach to peace negotiations, Song Min-jae said carefully. Admiral Zethros looked puzzled but polite. I see. Well, I'm sure your experts will provide valuable insights. As he walked away, Song Min-jae caught the slight hesitation in his voice when he said, experts. It was clear he wasn't sure what to make of the human delegation. They think we're weak, Dr. Kang Soo-hyun said quietly. She had been listening to conversations throughout the room. Several delegates have made comments about Earth sending non-combatants to a military negotiation. Let them think that, Song Min-jae replied. It might work to our advantage. A loud voice interrupted their conversation. So these are the famous humans. They turned to see a large alien approaching. He was massive, with gray skin and thick armor that made him look like a walking tank. The red symbols on his uniform identified him as Vorthak. I am General Thaxon, he announced. I have heard much about your species, though I must say you are not what I expected. Song Min-jae stepped forward. General Thaxon, I'm Dr. Song Min-jae, leading Earth's delegation. General Thaxon looked her up and down, clearly unimpressed. A doctor, not a general or admiral? I specialize in conflict resolution. General Thaxon laughed, a harsh sound that made several nearby delegates turn to look. Conflict resolution? There is only one way to resolve conflict, Doctor. Victory or defeat. The strong survive, the weak submit. That's one perspective, Song Min-jae said calmly. But there are others. Such as finding solutions that work for everyone involved. General Thaxon's laugh became even louder. You humans are truly naive. This galaxy is not a place for soft thinking. It is a place for warriors. We'll see, Song Min-jae said simply. General Thaxon stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked away, still chuckling. Song Min-jae noticed that several other delegates had been watching the exchange with interest. He's trying to intimidate us, Professor Choi Yoon-ji observed. And he's succeeding with some of the other delegates, Yoon Jae-hwan added. I can see a few coalition representatives looking uncomfortable. Dr. Kang Soo-hyun was studying General Thaxon as he moved through the room. His behavior is interesting. Very aggressive, very public. He's trying to establish dominance not just over us, but over everyone here. Classic military thinking, Song Min-jae agreed. Show strength, demand respect through fear. The reception continued for another hour. The human delegation moved through the room, introducing themselves to other delegates and observing the social dynamics. Song Min-jae noticed several interesting patterns. The coalition delegates seemed tired. Despite their military bearing, there was something worn about them, like soldiers who had been fighting too long. The Vorthak delegates, by contrast, seemed energetic and confident, almost eager for the negotiations to begin. The smaller species delegates stayed mostly in their own groups, speaking quietly among themselves. They watched the interactions between the major powers but rarely joined in. "It's like a chess game," Yoon Jae-won said quietly as they regrouped near one wall. "Everyone is positioning themselves before the real game starts, and we're the pieces nobody knows how to use," Professor Choi Yoonji added. Finally, an announcement echoed through the room in multiple languages. The formal opening ceremony would begin shortly. All delegates were asked to move to the main conference hall. As they walked toward the hall, Dr. Kang Soo-hyun fell into step beside Song Min-jae. "I've been watching the interactions between delegates. There are some interesting patterns, such as the coalition and Vorthak delegates avoid each other completely, which is normal for enemies. But some of the neutral species delegates seem nervous around both groups, more nervous than they should be if this was just a standard peace negotiation." Song Min-jae nodded thoughtfully. "Keep observing, and keep notes on everything you see." The main conference hall was even more impressive than the reception area. It was designed like an ancient amphitheater with curved rows of seats arranged around a central speaking area. Each delegation had their own section, with environmental controls adjusted for their specific needs. The human delegation took their assigned seats, aware that many eyes were upon them. Song Min-jae looked around the hall and counted 47 different species represented. This was the most diverse gathering in galactic history. A tall, elegant alien with silver skin stepped into the central speaking area. Her voice carried clearly throughout the hall without any obvious amplification. "Welcome, delegates, to the Kepler Conference. We gather here in hope of ending the conflict that has consumed our galaxy for 3 years. Each species brings their own perspective, their own wisdom to this endeavor." She paused and looked directly at the human section. "We are particularly pleased to welcome the delegation from Earth, participating in galactic diplomacy for the first time." Polite applause filled the hall, though Song Min-jae noticed it sounded somewhat forced from certain sections. "Before we begin formal negotiations tomorrow, each delegation will have the opportunity to present their approach to achieving." Lee Min-ho stared at the blue hologram floating above his desk. The message had arrived just minutes ago, but he had read it 5 times already. His coffee had gone cold while he tried to understand what he was seeing. The Galactic Coalition wanted Earth to join peace talks. This had never happened before. In the 300 years since humans first left their home planet, the galaxy had mostly ignored them. Earth was small, weak, and far from the important trade routes. Most alien species saw humans as newcomers who had nothing important to offer. But now they were asking for help. Lee Min-ho pressed a button on his desk. "Park Ji-won, please come to my office immediately." While he waited, Lee Min-ho walked to the large window that showed the surface of Earth's moon. Luna Station was humanity's most important outpost, home to the Earth Colonial Authority. From here, humans managed their small colonies and tried to stay out of galactic politics. The war between the Coalition and the Vorthak Empire had been going on for 3 years. Lee Min-ho had watched the news reports with growing concern. Entire star systems had been destroyed. Billions of aliens had died. The war was getting worse every day. Park Ji-won entered the office without knocking. She was the director of Earth's Intelligence Division, and she looked tired. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform was wrinkled. "You got the message too?" she asked. Lee Min-ho nodded. "What do you think?" Park Ji-won sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. "I think it's strange. Why now? Why us?" "Maybe they're desperate," Lee Min-ho said. "The war isn't going well for anyone. Or maybe it's a trap." Lee Min-ho had known Park Ji-won for 15 years. She was always suspicious, always looking for hidden dangers. Usually this made her good at her job. But sometimes Lee Min-ho wondered if she saw threats where none existed. "Read it again," he said, gesturing to the hologram. Park Ji-won leaned forward and studied the message. It was written in formal diplomatic language, the kind that said a lot without really saying anything. But the basic meaning was clear. The Coalition wanted Earth to send representatives to peace talks on the neutral world of Kepler 442b. They want our military leaders, Park Ji-won said. Look at this part. They specifically mention sending our finest commanders and most experienced warriors. Lee Min-ho had noticed that too. Every species in the galaxy handled diplomacy the same way. When there was a war, soldiers fought. When it was time for peace, soldiers negotiated. It made sense to most aliens. Who better to end a war than the people who understood war? But humans were different. We don't have military leaders like they do, Lee Min-ho said. Our entire space fleet has maybe 50 ships. Our Marines number in the thousands, not millions. Exactly. So why invite us? Before Lee Min-ho could answer, his office door opened. Again. Kim Hyun-woo walked in carrying a tablet and looking excited. He was young, maybe 25, and had only been working at the Colonial Authority for 2 years. But he was brilliant at analyzing strategic situations. Sir, I've been studying the war data, Kim Hyun-woo said. There's something strange about this conflict. Park Ji-won raised an eyebrow. Strange how? Kim Hyun-woo set his tablet on Lee Min-ho's desk and activated a holographic display. Star maps appeared, showing the positions of Coalition and Vorthak forces. Look at the battle patterns, Kim Hyun-woo said. Neither side is trying to win quickly. The Vorthak could have struck at the Coalition's main supply lines months ago. The Coalition has had chances to attack key Vorthak worlds but didn't take them. Lee Min-ho studied the maps. He wasn't a military expert, but even he could see what Kim Hyun-woo meant. The war looked almost careful, like both sides were holding back. Maybe they're both exhausted, Park Ji-won suggested. Or maybe someone wants the war to continue, Kim Hyun-woo said quietly. The room fell silent. Lee Min-ho felt a chill run down his spine. If Kim Hyun-woo was right, then the peace talks might be more complicated than they appeared. We need to make a decision, Lee Min-ho said finally. The Coalition expects an answer within 24 hours. Park Ji-won stood up and began pacing. It was something she did when she was thinking hard. If we say no, we miss a chance to be part of galactic politics. If we say yes, we might be walking into danger. What kind of danger? Kim Hyun-woo asked. The kind where small, weak species get used as pawns by bigger ones. Lee Min-ho understood Park Ji-won's concern. Humans had always been careful in their dealings with other species. They were polite, helpful when possible, but never took sides in major conflicts. It had kept them safe, but also kept them isolated. What if we approach this differently? Lee Min-ho said. Both Park Ji-won and Kim Hyun-woo looked at him. The Coalition expects us to send military commanders. What if we don't? Park Ji-won stopped pacing. What do you mean? Lee Min-ho walked back to his window and looked out at Earth, visible as a blue dot in the distance. Somewhere on that planet, humans were going about their daily lives. They were working, studying, raising families, solving problems. They were doing what humans did best, adapting and surviving. What if we send civilians instead, he said. Civilians? Kim Hyun-woo sounded confused. Think about it. Every other species will send their best generals and admirals. They'll argue about territory and weapons and who wins what battles. But what if we send people who think differently? Park Ji-won was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile, but the kind she made when she was beginning to understand a complex problem. You want to send problem solvers, not fighters. Exactly. Economists who understand why wars really start. Historians who know how other conflicts ended. Psychologists who can read people's true motivations. Kim Hyun-woo was nodding enthusiastically. It's completely unexpected. No one would see it coming. It's also risky, Park Ji-won warned. The other species might see it as an insult, or a sign of weakness. Lee Min-ho turned back to face them. Maybe, but it might also give us an advantage. While everyone else is thinking like soldiers, we'll be thinking like humans. They spent the next hour discussing the idea. Park Ji-won remained skeptical. but she began suggesting names of people who might be good for such a mission. Kim Hyun-woo pulled up files on various civilian experts, looking for ones with the right skills and temperament. Finally, Lee Min-ho made his decision. "We'll do it. We'll send a civilian delegation to the peace talks." "I'll start putting together a list of candidates," Kim Hyun-woo said. "And I'll start gathering intelligence on all the other delegates," Park Ji-won added. "If we're going to play this game, we need to know who we're playing against." As they prepared to leave, Park Ji-won paused at the door. "Min-ho, there's something else. I've been monitoring Vorthak communications. There are hints that they're planning something at these peace talks, something beyond just negotiation." Lee Min-ho felt that chill again. "What kind of something?" "I'm not sure yet, but we should be very careful about who we send." After they left, Lee Min-ho sat alone in his office looking at the message from the coalition. In a few hours, he would send Earth's response. They would accept the invitation to the peace talks, but they would do it in a way that no one expected. He hoped he was making the right choice. Outside his window, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that its children were about to step onto the biggest stage in the galaxy. For the first time in human history, Earth would have a voice in galactic affairs. The question was, would anyone listen?